Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina-r-Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and I am so happy to be together. We are going to have a wonderful conversation today about what we women experience emotionally, mentally, and physically as we age, and the roles that we play in order to survive. And to have this conversation with me, I have achea-redd. She's the author of Be Free, Be You. She has a website called Real Girls Fart. And FART stands for Fearless, Authentic, Rescuer, and Trailblazer. One of her missions is normalizing the conversation around mental health. So, Achea, thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
Thank you, Gina, for having me. I am delighted to be here and to have this discussion with you and your tribe.
I think it's a very important conversation. And as we said before we hit record, the conversation about mental health, it has become a little bit more common. But over your lifetime and mine, it would have been one that people didn't talk about. So we are at a unique season where, especially with quarantine, as we're recording, we're kind of, quarantine is slowly beginning to lift. Mental health has been a really big issue. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself, Achea, your mission and your message? What brought you to start this blog, Real Girls Fart?
So I have to say, I did mean for there to be pun with that word. So for all of your tribe that is listening out there, I meant it just as it is, because we have been taught as women to hold our emotions in, hold our feelings in, certain things we can't say, certain things we cannot do because it is not becoming of us as women. So I purposely went for that word and decided to assign Fearless, Authentic, Rescuer, Trailblazer, which are positive words, to a word that has been deemed as inappropriate. So about 4.5 years ago, I was faced with a very big change in my life. Had a breast cancer scare. Thankfully, it ended up coming out that it was benign. But what that did was, that was so traumatizing. So I started to have these panic attacks. And I started to have all of this anxiety that I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that, I was waking up in the middle of the night. I wasn't able to sleep. And I went to my doctor after one of the panic attacks, and it was a bad one. And I was really sick after it. I just felt really sick. And he diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder. And I struggled with that diagnosis, to be quite honest, because I'm African American. I come from a Christian household. So, anxiety, what is that? Depression, what is that? We just don't talk about that. We pray about those things. We give them to God, and which all of that is valid. But for me at that time, it was very difficult for me to accept that that was what I was going through. And so I decided to pursue consistent therapy. I decided to pursue medication as a means of helping get myself back in the right mindset. And also, while I was going through therapy, I decided to start the blog, Real Girls Fart. And that was basically me charting my journey through therapy, the things that I was learning, the things that I had come to realize about anxiety, about depression, being an African American woman, what I had grown up in. And come to find out that I had this anxiety disorder my entire life. This wasn't something that just hit me all of a sudden because I had a breast cancer scare. That might have been something that maybe triggered it to come to the surface. But there were moments as I look back on my childhood that I had bouts with anxiety and even bouts with depression. And so that's what's been so important for me, to just continue to pay it forward and have these conversations with women and girls alike so that they can feel more normal, honestly, and normalize the discussion.
And it takes someone like yourself to step up and say, it's okay to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
imagine the amount of healing that could take place if people were allowed to talk about things. One of the things
Yeah.
that I've really believed very strongly, my mom was in an abusive marriage when I was younger. And as I grew up, I began to realize that when we don't talk about something traumatic, when we don't talk about something that's really hard on us emotionally, it intensifies guilt and shame and all of the negative emotions, right? So in
Yeah.
order to get through to the other side, we have to admit, we have to face. We can no
Yeah.
longer deny or cut off that part of ourself or pretend that it doesn't exist. Did you find that to be true in your journey?
Yeah, I do. I actually hang my hat on the mantra that exposure brings closure. And I know it sounds cheesy and it rhymes, but that's kind of a reminder for me that the more of my scars and valleys in life that I bring exposure to, I am able to bring closure to those wounds and to those areas of my life. And it also helps me realize that mental health, trauma recovery, healing, all of that is like it's up and down, right? It's not linear. It's a journey, and it's a marathon. It's not a race. So you just have to kind of continue, pressing along, and and things do get better. They sometimes you have setbacks, but you know what? If you take two steps forward and one step back, at least you've made one step forward, right? So that's how I have to kind of look at it, is that even though I'm going to have setbacks and I'm going to have days where I don't feel my best, the more that I still continue to show up and be myself and have the conversation and be honest about what is going on in my life, it actually brings healing.
Mm. And that healing is so important, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
I recently was reading something and it was talking about we have to stop cutting off pieces of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Yeah.
something to that journey that you're talking about. It's a journey to wholeness, isn't it? It's finding those pieces
Oh,
we've
yeah.
denied and bringing light to them. And instead of being ashamed of them or embarrassed or whatever the negative emotion is that we might be struggling with, but
Yeah.
embracing that fullness of who we are and being willing to do what we need to do to
Yes, the
nurture and
work.
heal it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's, and a lot of people, I think they may be okay talking to certain people about, their struggles. And I think that's good. It takes somebody, that's pretty bold to kind of blast her whole life out to the entire universe about everything that has happened in my whole life and write a, whole book about it and everything. But I think that, you'll find people, and I have found people that are okay with talking to some people about it, but what they're not okay with is actually doing the work after they talk about it. So that's why you'll have people that, and no offense, like if you're, in therapy for 10 years, I mean, that's fine if that's what it takes. But there are some people that actually are in therapy for 10 years and they're not doing any work. They're literally going in there and they're just talking, but they're not actually putting in work. So it has to be talking, and then it has to be actually doing or putting into action those things that you are talking about.
Isn't it challenging and daunting to think of it as one giant task, right?
Oh, yeah.
But when we realize that we're still going to live the same life, we're still going to have the
Mm-hmm.
days that we have. It's what are
Mm-hmm.
we doing each day
Mm-hmm.
to begin?
Yeah, you have to break it apart. Yeah, to your point, you have to break it apart, Gina, in like smaller pieces. Like I cannot, and again, this is how I got myself into trouble in the first place, right? So when you think about anxiety, it's like this fear of like worrying about the future. So I like to say, when people ask me like, well, what's your best definition of the difference between anxiety and depression? So they're sisters. They both involve a hamster wheel inside your head. Anxiety is the hamster wheel forward, thinking too much in the future. Depression is the hamster wheel backward, thinking too much in your past and what has happened to you. Both scenarios are no good. Both scenarios will lead you down dark, dark rabbit holes. I unfortunately have experienced both of them. And sometimes they have come at the same time, because when I get so far down a negative rabbit hole and I'm depressed, I get anxious because I'm not able to function. Or, vice versa with the anxiety, it leads it back into depression. So it's a constant, like, I have to think about it like every day. I have to make a decision to show up. Some days my wins are going to look like getting up and being fearless and doing this podcast with you today. There are other days that, in all honesty, I'm just not there, but I can get up and I can take a shower. I can put the dishes in the dishwasher. I can show up to life. So there are just stages and there are levels. And I think we have to be super compassionate with ourselves, super patient with ourselves, and allowing ourselves to be present and do whatever it is that we can do that day.
Allowing ourselves to be present and do whatever we can do that day. We don't always have to wear a cape. We don't always have to leap buildings in a single bound, right?
That's right. That's right. It's one step at a time. It's it's a silly kind of analogy that I kind of envision Tarzan, and how he would like jump off of the vine that he was on, and every time he would jump off of that vine, the next vine would appear. And that's, my whole mental health journey is a leap of faith. Like every single day, every single moment, I have to make the decision to just step out on faith and jump off of the vine that I'm on, and the next one just appears while I'm midair. It always appears, and it's scary. It's very, very scary. And I think acknowledging the fact that, it's going to be scary. It's not going to not ever be scary. And I was talking to somebody, they asked me about the first word in my acronym, fearless. And they were like, or don't you think you should rethink that word? Like, because you're not without fear. And I'm like, no, I know, but the way that I mean it and the way that I define it is that you're not going to be fearless, like meaning you're not going to have any fear, but you're going to be able to do things while you're scared. Like you're able to take that step, even though that still to me is bravery. That still to me is being fearless. So, scared may be what I'm feeling, but brave is what I'm doing. And that's how I see that word. So I think it's so fitting for what I try to talk to women about, is embracing their story, telling their story, and being fearless in that. And, even though it scares you, do it anyway.
I love how you said that. Scared may be what I'm feeling, but brave is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
How does one begin that journey? Because anxiety can be so crippling. And I think we all have things that upset us. So when did you realize that it was something more?
I had a nervous breakdown. So, and it didn't happen right at the same time as a breast cancer scare. That like actually happened a couple months later, because I kept having these panic attacks. And then it just graduated, like from anxiety attacks or panic attacks to my muscles were twitching. It was really weird stuff, because I've never, experienced that before. It was loss of appetite. I wasn't eating, obviously, because I couldn't eat. And I had this tremor that I developed. And that was what really, it scared me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have a friend that has MS. So I was super nervous about like the muscle twitches and the shaking and things. And, with anxiety, you Google everything. And so that was the worst thing I could have done. I was on WebMD like 20 times a day, like trying to Google my tremor and muscle twitching. And all I found was that I was going to die within 4 years. You know what I mean? So it's just like, and I think that actually, I laugh at it now, but it actually added to my stress and it added to the anxiety. So then I was sleeping even less, because I was worried about dying, and I was worried about this impending doom of, this whatever I was thinking that I had in my brain. And then it just went to uncontrollable crying, and I just could not do anything. Like I would have one gear. It was like happy, sad, And I don't even think I was happy actually, but no matter what was going on in my life, I was crying. And I just couldn't function anymore. Like I just physically could not function. My nervous system was shutting down, and sending these signals like, you have got to get some help. So that's how I realized, like, oh man, like I better deal with this or this is about to take me out.
Mm. I think those baby steps at the beginning, when you
Yeah,
feel anxiety, our bodies are designed to go in and out of stress, right? Stress has a function in our life.
it does.
But when we go into overdrive like that, that's when the problem begins, when the stress never stops. And it's not like external stress, but like how our body is coping, right? The
Hmm.
cortisol's through the roof and your central nervous system is just no longer functioning. And we were
Yeah,
talking about earlier before we hit record, just when the hormones begin to change too. So this mental health conversation,
yeah,
it could be hormones. It could be a chemical
yep,
imbalance. There's so many things that it could
yeah.
be. What was the journey that you took to find the answers? What were the steps that you took?
I went on medication.
Hmm.
I started taking an antidepressant, and then I went to therapy on a consistent basis and did a lot of the talk therapy. I explored like this thing is called EMDR. Don't ask me to spell it out, but you have to Google that. That's one thing that you can Google, EMDR. And that really helped me with some trauma. It helped bring some stuff to the surface.
That was the eye movement, right?
Yeah, yeah, yep,
I have a very limited understanding of what it is, but it has to do with unlocking the subconscious mind so that they can
yeah,
untangle, I guess, right?
yeah. And and it's funny because I agree to it, and I have a limited knowledge of what it. I just know it worked,
Yeah.
and I just know that I was able to untangle a lot of things and get to the root of certain things and remember things that I had buried. And that was hard. That was really, really hard, but I did it. And now, even I have decided to go back into therapy, and do some more work. But it wasn't like I just, been in there this whole time. Like I took breaks, like once I kind of got over that hump of feeling really bad, I took some breaks because I think sometimes, you have to give yourself some breaks. You have to give yourself time to process everything that you've learned in therapy. You have to give yourself time to actually put into action what you've learned. And so, yeah, I mean, that was my step, it was medication, it was therapy. My faith played a big part in it. It took me getting really angry about everything that I had been taught about God and questioning it, and then relearning who God was to me and who he is to me, and really who I am as an individual. My identity, in Christ, was and is super important. I'm still learning that. And I think, just continuing every day to just make the decision to show up and to be honest. It's just every day it's the same thing. It's just consistency.
There's a book by Dr. Amen called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life.
Mm-hmm.
And I found in my own journey, right, there's different ways to come at. I personally haven't had the anxiety, but I've definitely struggled with hardcore self-criticism, just like Mean Girl 2.0 on a
Yeah,
consistent basis. And I think, when you change your brain, you read a book like that is a good place to start, is I guess what I'm saying, because
yeah,
I think we tend to think in terms of, if I do this, then this, if
yeah,
then, if then, and it can work, but there's
yeah,
stuff happening inside of our minds that we've
yes,
learned. You mentioned it yourself, misunderstanding who God is, like having wrong information about
yep,
ourselves, about our faith, about relationships, whatever it is, right? I feel like that really affects how we experience things emotionally, mentally, and physically, is that state of belief in our
yeah,
mind. And if it's off, it's like we're seeing through the wrong glasses, and that can cause
Yeah.
stress too. I mean, it seems to me that that's a real stress thing, is when we are trying to hang on to, or we don't even realize that we're hanging on to things that are actually wounding us, our beliefs.
Yeah, it's true. Because it's funny you bring that up. Actually, in my book, Be Free, Be You, I actually talk about I forget what chapter it's in exactly, but I talk about how what I was going through from a mental health perspective, I actually I can see it from spiritual eyes too. Is that, there was like the old me, the wounded me, the traumatized me, and the new me was trying to emerge, and it was a war, like letting go of those things and becoming the person that God wants me to be. And I was holding on to the things that were hurting me. And to be quite honest, I mean, if I'm being 100% vulnerable, like, I haven't arrived, right? I'm still, there's that. Why do you think I'm going back into therapy? There are still, I think you can't deal with everything at one time. I think if you do, you will really overload yourself. So I dealt with stuff in stages as it came to me. There are now different things that are being revealed, and it's like an onion.
Oh gosh, and it's the biggest onion ever, right? It feels like this is
It
the biggest
is.
onion in the world.
It is. It seriously is. I said that, like, to myself 2 days ago. I was like, I am like the biggest onion. I have layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. I spent all this time in therapy, then took a break, then went back, then took a break, and now I'm going back. And I'm like, and there's still more. And so, to your point, just because you go to therapy doesn't mean that you're gonna, change like overnight. That expectation will set you up for failure. So don't go into therapy thinking that. I think, I've read self-help books a lot. I still read them. Sometimes trying to read them while I'm in therapy is too much, unless it's something that my therapist actually tells me that I should be reading. I try to, like, do one thing at a time. But yeah, man, we are onions, women. Women, we have a lot of, and that's not a bad thing, actually. Like, a lot of times people say it, sometimes it's a negative, but there are some positives to that too. Our layers and our ability to be able to feel and connect. I appreciate that about being a woman.
Don't you think, Akia, that the layers are what enable us to fill so many roles? That's one of the things
Oh
that we
yeah.
talk about, our roles as women. We're not
Hmm.
singular, and that's why we're able to do
Yeah.
so many things. But isn't there a balance to that, doing so many things?
Yeah. I mean, there is, and when you find out, you let me know.
Right? I know, I don't.
I mean, there is a balance. One of the first things I learned was not to be a martyr, not to put my superhero cape on, or they call it the Jesus Christ syndrome, where you, like, kind of try to help everybody, the laying on of hands. You think everybody is gonna, be fixed. I can't fix anybody. I can only work on me. I do think that our layers as women, my layers as a woman, has enabled me to be able to wear so many different hats at many given times, sometimes the same time. I'm able to have like 5 conversations at once, or meaning phone, computer, like, just, I'm everywhere, and I'm able to do it well. But just because you're able to do something well doesn't mean you should do it all the time. you know, while that is a positive about us as women, I think that it can go negative pretty quickly if, one, we put too much on our plates and we get burned out, and then we're not filling ourselves back up because we don't know how to do that. Or it could, backfire in a sense of you just start being really ineffective, too, like in what you're doing. And I've had experience, with both of those scenarios, So yeah, I think you just have to find whatever your balance is. I can't tell you what yours is. I can only tell you what mine is.
Right. And like you said, we don't always know what that is. But what I hear you saying, the underlying theme to what you just said to me, is the idea of setting boundaries with
Mm-hmm.
ourselves
Yeah.
and with people around us. We've
Yeah.
got to learn to understand where the edge is so that we don't fall off of it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so true. Like, and only you as the individual know what your edge is. I do not know what Gina's edge is. You do not know what Akea's edge is unless
You're going to know
you
when I'm
tell
there,
me.
though, Achea.
Well, see, and that's the thing. Like, and I think that's what happens. We allow ourselves to get too close to it, to the point where, I mean, some of us just jump off. Like, some of us just go off the deep end. That's where we have a lot of conversations that you regret having. You say a lot of things that you shouldn't say, that are hurtful. I think sometimes we get too close to the edge and we allow ourselves to get too close to that edge. And some of us just fall off. And we just, that's when we have conversations that hurt people's feelings, that we end up having to apologize for later. You know, I think we all have to do a better job of defining our edge. And before we get there, we stop and we reevaluate what we're doing.
You know, it takes courage to do that because you were saying that a lot of women don't really know how to maybe express themselves or set boundaries or say no. I mean, you didn't say that, but
It's not a
essentially,
skill that we're taught.
right? Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I think when you talk about doing a better
We're not
job
taught
of
that.
defining our edge, I think we have to even learn what an edge is that and not feeling bad when we said it, right? All
Yeah.
the guilt or the
Yeah.
I'm a bad
Exactly.
fill in the
Yeah.
blank. That's tough.
Yeah. No, seriously. Again, that is not something that we're taught as women. We are not taught to say no. We are not, except for, when it comes to, sexual stuff. And, those are the types of things that we're taught to say no to. But when it comes to like setting boundaries of like what we are able to do or put on our plate, it's the answer is always yes. That's what the expectation is that, well, of course you're going to do it, like, because you're the woman and you can do all things. And I think you grow up watching your grandmother do it, you grow up watching your mom do it, pretty much every female in your life, you watch, model that out before you. And I didn't know what any of this even meant until I went and sat and talked to a female therapist that said the word boundaries, because I didn't know what that meant.
Mm. It can be very uncomfortable for some people
Mm-hmm.
to do the work of setting boundaries, to say
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to work for me. I think I don't necessarily have difficulty saying no on the whole. I'm like, okay, no, we're not doing this, but for some women, that's a hard thing to say. So a really great phrase that someone said to me once in setting boundaries in a relationship was, that's not going to work for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gentler way of saying, I'm going to put
No.
this little bubble here. And you're not
Yeah,
coming
no. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I could agree with you. I am more like you in that way. I don't have an issue saying no. I don't have an issue or a problem saying, no, that's not going to work for me. I think where I get into trouble with roles is I have a very different perspective on like how I'm supposed to be loved and accepted. So I think it's through my performance.
in.
So that's where I get into trouble. It's, fulfilling this role, fulfilling that role, or this obligation or that obligation is going to give me greater value in the other person's eyes. So I have to do that, be that, say this, say that in order for them to love me. Because if I don't fulfill those roles, then they're going to be disappointed and they're not going to love me or they're not going to accept me. That's where I personally get into trouble. Like, saying no to go to an event or something like that, I can easily say, no, that's not gonna, but it's when I'm in relationship with somebody, it's very difficult, for me to just be okay with them loving me for me and not based on what I do.
I have a question for you on that point of growth. and learning to set those boundaries and trusting that people will love you where you're at, not because of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
As you've grown, have you found that some relationships have naturally fallen off or changed because of your personal
Mm-hmm.
growth?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was one of the hardest things I think about therapy in general was that, what I learned was, one of the first things my therapist said to me when I came in the office, she said, I need you to realize that you're the one in therapy. So you're the one that's going to be growing. You're the one that's going to be changing. These other people that you're talking about, they're not in therapy. And so you're going to come to the relationship very different than they are. And you're going to have to adjust your expectations. That was really, really hard. And so, yes, I have lost a lot of relationships. It seems to be, it's a revolving door. There are a lot more as I grow and I get older that I'm learning that there are a lot more exits than there are entrances.
Mm. Yes.
As far as relationships,
Mhm. Yeah. And I think, I don't know about you, Achea, but it feels personal.
Oh, yeah.
Like, is it me? I'm the common denominator. There's,
Yeah.
what am I not doing right? That's the
Yeah.
question that runs through my head.
Yeah.
And somebody said to me once, and I've shared this so many times, and I wish I could remember who said this, but it was like, boom, mic drop. Okay. I
Mm-hmm.
instantly put it on Instagram. It was like one of those like, yes. And
Yeah.
it's, as you grow, some people can't go with you because they can't breathe at that altitude.
Yes. Yes. I've heard that.
And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, it's not like I'm better, they're not good. It's not a value judgment. It's just honestly, some people don't want to.
Yeah.
They may never want to. And that's where I struggle.
Yeah. Because you're like, why wouldn't you? Like, why wouldn't you want to grow? Like, why wouldn't you? I know. I feel you. I have that same struggle. Like even now, talking to you, I mean, there are plenty of situations that I could point to that have happened to me that currently are going on, where I'm just like, okay, here's another one that another one bites the dust. But I think like you, I always end up going back and turning it inward because I think, for me growing up, it was always like whenever I would come to tell somebody about my feelings or whatever, it was always something that I did. So it always got turned back on me. Like everything, that was wrong was my fault. I took something personally. I was the one that wasn't doing something right. And so when that happens to you on a consistent basis, in relationships, you kind of just learn that, I'm the one to blame. And so
Mhm.
you immediately start saying, oh, it's me. It's not them. It's definitely me. And that's not the case at all. It's not the case at all. To your point, it really is just, the relationship probably has just run its course. And we just have to, not overthink it and just be okay with it. But that's hard for people like you and me.
So hard. As you're talking, something was popping into my mind that, when we take responsibility, there's the good, healthy taking responsibility. What part do I play? What do I need to do differently? Do I need to
Yep.
apologize? Whatever. But then
Yep.
there's the taking the responsibility in the sense of feeling like that gives us control, or that gives us a sense of, okay, if it's me, if I can blame me, then I can fix it. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
hardcore, like, love to find a solution. Like, let me just fix this. That's totally,
Yeah.
they always talk about, men are fixers. Yeah, well, I came with a hardcore need to fix. And I think when we're
Yeah.
talking about mental health, that can drive you crazy because you said something earlier that your therapist said you're in therapy. They're not. So we're on this trajectory of growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we forget that we're taking it alone.
Yes.
And so we can damage our own mental health, assuming
Yes.
that it's going to change our world external. But
Right.
it's
It's more about
really,
you in turn.
yes.
Hmm. Yeah. I wish I mean, I didn't know that going into it. And I think,
Me either.
yeah, right. I mean, you don't, that's just not what you think that therapy is. I mean, first of all, like what I've always heard is that you go to therapy to help deal with the people in your life that won't go.
Yeah.
It's never really about, you know, but then when you get there and you actually get on the couch and you start talking through things, you realize that, oh, yeah, this is about me. This is about me changing my expectation. This is about me, not being so mean to myself, or, you know, whatever the issue is. So yeah, I completely agree with you. It's an internal thing.
So that mental health piece, you said a
Hmm.
couple of things. That self-compassion
Yeah.
and adjusting our expectations, because the expectations go both ways, right? We expect things of ourselves. Whether or not they're realistic is not exactly the point. It's just that we have them.
Yeah.
Where did those expectations come from? That affects our mental health. It
Yeah.
affects our emotional and our mental state when we live in the land of shoulds and all of these
Hmm.
expectations. I think as women, with all the roles that we play, well, we should be doing this, and we start layering on the it's like a high jumper, right? The pole
Yeah.
just keeps going higher and higher and higher, and we never feel like we are enough or that we're doing enough.
Right.
We always feel like we're
Right.
falling short,
Hmm.
and that
Yeah.
is such a dangerous place for us to be. How do we
Yeah.
change that? It's hard work.
I know. I mean, I think that's if you could find the answer to that question, I think that you would be a very rich woman, because we all have that question, like, how do I change this constant behavior of blaming myself and not thinking that I'm not good enough and not measuring up? I'm going to tell you, I'm still on that journey. I'm still trying to learn how to find happiness and joy and value within myself, and not look for other people externally to give that to me. Because logically, what I do know is that if other people can give it to you, then they can take it away.
Mm.
And so I do realize that that's what I just said is very logical. And the other is it's not logical, and it's irrational a little bit, that, people should be responsible for everything, no, like, you have to be responsible for your own joy, not other people. And, I think that's the $1,000,000 question. I don't think we're going to even solve it on this podcast.
No, but honestly, Achea, starting the conversation is such an important thing to do,
Yeah.
because some people's worlds don't have a conversation starter in them.
No, it's true. Yeah. I mean, exactly. And you have to get really curious. I think that's what you and I have done today. And what we're doing is we're encouraging women to get curious and ask themselves the right questions.
Mm.
And ask themselves, wait a minute, like, what do I view as the source of my joy? Or where do I feel like my joy comes from? Do I value myself based on what I do as opposed to who I am? Do I feel like who I am is enough without my roles that I play? Those are all questions that I think we have to sit with and ask ourselves. And I don't think we will actually change until we ask ourselves the questions and get curious.
Mm. I love how you put that, am I enough who I am?
Mm-hmm.
And that I see that affecting our mental health, because there's this sense of never enough. I know that I struggle, and maybe you can share your journey, but giving myself credit for what I've done. Like, it's like you
Mm-hmm.
accomplish something and you move on. And you never really sit and celebrate that moment of, I did that thing, and allow yourself to feel the fullness or the satisfaction of accomplishing that thing. Whether it's getting out of bed and taking a shower, like you said, there are days when that right there is a victory.
It's
right?
victory. Hmm.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be changing the world and leaping those buildings, and it might be,
Some days it will look like that.
but I think we grade things, and this isn't a big deal. That's a big deal, and that's potentially a stumbling block to our mental and emotional health in having these grades to everything instead of just saying, dude, I rock. I got out of bed and I took a shower. Woo!
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And to your point, I mean, I I'm just like you. I can accomplish something that was really good, and I don't even sit in it to enjoy it. What I will do is I will just say, okay, that was great. Now what's next?
It's like a
And what
habit
I
of minimizing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, I know for me, my journey with that and my experience with that is because of how I was parented, and also, as a Christian growing up in the with the belief system that I had as a young child is like, don't think too highly of yourself, don't get big headed, like pride cometh before a fall, like all of those things that you're taught, that I mean there is weight on them and there's some truth in them, but they were like very much out of context, I think. And very much coming from like a legalistic perspective and not a relational kind of like love kind of relationship with God. So I have a tendency to minimize what I do because I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to be prideful because I don't want to fall. So,
I'm
you
so
know,
feeling everything you're saying. Oh my gosh, because, you know, we're created in God's image, and there's a way that we can function to the best in this
mhm,
fallen world and with these difficulties. But we cannot function at our best when we're denying. I keep saying this, but we can't keep doing that. When we deny pieces of ourselves, we can't get to the healthy. Like there's
yeah,
this moment, and I should say moments, many
mhm,
moments when we face things in ourselves, around ourselves, maybe the way we were parented, maybe those belief systems, the legalism. We can have this conversation off the recording, but things like that do set us up to have a specific worldview that
mhm,
it's all about black and white, right? Good, bad, right,
yes,
wrong. I
yes,
just said to my husband over the weekend, I said, honey, I'm just to that point where it's like when we're talking about mental health, this figures in. There's a whole lot more gray than I like there to be. And that makes me struggle.
yes, because it's about control. And that's for me, like, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I think the person who came up with the Enneagram
Yo,
personality
eight
test.
wing seven right here.
Okay, so you're a what? What are you?
I'm an 8 wing 7.
Oh, yeah, I'm an 8 too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
People,
can see that.
we're the ones that people are like, oh, tell me what you really think, sarcastically, because we've just told them what we
Yeah,
think. And they're real unhappy about it.
yeah. And you know what? And I'm telling you, those extreme polarities in my life, like the blacks and the whites, I find that I have a hard time finding balance. Again, like you said it perfectly, like there's way more gray than I'm even comfortable with. And for me, there's right, there's wrong. So, like, I don't care if it's my mother that's wrong. I'm going to stand up for the bum on the street because he's right. And not everybody, and then I get upset because not everybody agrees. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you stand up for the person who, like, because other people have a different way of viewing it. And that's really hard for me to see that, and to, or not to see it, but to accept it. So that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm working through, actually, is like, you know trying to get more comfortable with the gray.
Mm, it's back to mental health, right? When we resist something that is real, right? when we resist something that's true, a universal truth, like there's just is more gray. And some people like it gray.
Mm-hmm.
If I continue to fight against that reality, I'm causing myself an undue amount of stress. And there's a journey of, I can still maintain who I am because we get better, hopefully, at who we are. We become the better version of ourselves.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, Achea, you and I are always going to look on the justice, right, wrong scale. We're just wired. Because like I've told my girls, just because someone is family, they don't get access to you if they're unhealthy. Like I had an uncle who was abusive. Well, my kids never knew him. So that's just an example of setting a boundary. Our personality, it's a little easier. Say, no. Whereas
Exactly.
for another personality, and this is where this mental health conversation begins to really start to flux, is if you know more about yourself and how you relate to the world, like using Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or, the fascination survey, whatever it is, you begin to understand yourself a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's like, why, we don't see things the same as people. We're usually married to someone who's nothing like us, right?
Oh, yes, I know.
And there's the conflict in life, right? Because we're all different. And so our mental health is almost coming to the grips of, yep, we expect the difference. And then we have to figure out how to dance within the differences.
Yeah, you know what? You said it very beautifully, actually, dance. I like the way you put that because that's basically what I just had a conversation yesterday with my mother about this. I have to learn how to exist in a world where not everything is black and white.
Yeah.
And, I think probably what gets me is that, to your point earlier, not everybody wants to be that self-aware, because if you come into the level of self-awareness that you and I may have, that holds us accountable for that information. And technically, if you know better, you're supposed to do better. So like, you and I are held to a level of accountability with how we relate, how we deal, because of the self-awareness that we walk in. Some people are not comfortable with that accountability. They would prefer to just be very emotionally unintelligent. They would prefer to be not aware to themselves or anything around them. Just because it's easier. Because once you get to know yourself, as we're talking about, and you become self-aware, it's a whole lot harder to exist in that space, because you realize things are not necessarily the way you think that they should be. So then you've got to learn a whole new way of existing. So it becomes a little bit, it's beautiful, but it's a little bit messy and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And a lot of people just don't like that.
It really is messy and uncomfortable. I think a growth journey, if you could put it in a nutshell, is you just have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. But the
100%.
other side of that discomfort, I don't know about you, Achea, but boy, the growth journey, as hard as it has been, I'm so grateful that I took it, because it improves my emotional and mental health. Like, it puts me in more alignment with myself and my world if I'm willing to deal with it.
Yes. And that is the takeaway. I mean, that's like, it's kind of like a little bit give and take, right? That is the sacrifice. There's a sacrifice, and then there's a reward that you get, based on making the sacrifice. And that self-actualization, that being aligned and being able to be comfortable in who you are and more closely connected with who God made you to be. Because like, who you are and how you relate is no surprise to God. He did you that way. And that's what I know. I don't think that God is trying to change the fabric of who I am at all. He might be trying to change how I deal with it and how I think, but I don't think he's trying to change the fabric or the core of who I am. He knows I'm an 8, and he's okay with that. But, the risk is, and the hard part is the uncomfortability, but the reward is being more closely connected with who you were meant to be.
And that's part of your acronym, right? Authenticity.
Yes, that's what true authenticity is truly embracing who you are. And the words actually follow suit pretty perfectly, because you cannot find out who you are if you're scared to dive in and be uncomfortable. So you have to be fearless in order to be authentic.
Mm.
And you got to take care of those two things before you can ever go and rescue anybody else. No, and all of those words just kind of, follow suit. I mean, the trailblazer, like, is just being different, living in a whole other place, like in self-actualization, and, and going out and actually changing the world through that and helping other people reach that point. That's when you're like, okay, I'm like walking in what I'm supposed to walk in. I'm, in my purpose. Mind you, that's still not an arrival of any means. You know what I mean? You still are working while you're trailblazing.
Mm. In that trailblazing, the more closely aligned it is with our authentic self, not what we think we should be doing or what someone
Right.
else has put our feet on that path, right? Someone else says, that's your path.
Right. Right.
It's getting
Exactly.
these things to get closer and closer and closer together until they're singing the same song.
Exactly. Exactly.
Maybe
Absolutely
we're
right.
all out of tune, Achea.
Uh, oh, well, yes, I would have to agree with that.
For like, what are you singing? That does not make any sense.
Exactly.
I think aside from chemical imbalances, and we definitely should see a doctor if we're having really dramatic
Yeah, for
mental health
sure.
issues. But in the day to day, just the
Mm-hmm.
struggles of being human,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good to, you said earlier, to begin to ask yourself better questions.
Mm-hmm.
Not why am I like this in the sense of a self-criticism, but maybe, what happened before I had this reaction?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, what do you call it? Zoom back a little and begin to
Mm-hmm.
ask questions to give yourself some clues. Because you and I both know, Achea, that the things we've learned and the habits that we've learned, they've all become kind of like our GPS system. And that GPS system could be completely inaccurate, but we're
Yes.
used to it, and that's, I think, what that mental health journey is fixing that GPS and getting back in tune with who we are. But we've actually come to the top of our hour, and I would love to have you share, kind of land the plane of your message and the idea of mental health, and from your life experience and what's in your heart. What kind of 3 gifts could you give to my tribe? It could be strategies. It could be start here,
Mm-hmm.
giving them courage, whatever it is that's in your heart. What 3 things could people kind of, anchor in a little bit to start their own journey or to continue it if they're kind of in a stuck place?
So the first thing would be kind of what we said towards the end here was get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think the second thing would be don't be afraid to feel all of your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
In short, basically feel the feels. And the third thing would be, even though you may be feeling scared, still make the decision to be brave.
Wow. Even though you may be feeling fear, decide to be brave. You know, on that note of bravery doesn't have to be a broad sweeping thing, does it?
No, no, it can look different. It looks different for everybody. And it doesn't always look like a superhero cape either, you know? So I think you have to find your brave.
Mm.
Find your brave.
Find your brave. Wow. Wow. Find your brave. Achea, I
Hmm.
want to thank you so much for this time that you've shared with me and with my tribe, and for bringing such authenticity and realness and gentleness to this mental health conversation, for sharing your own, for kind of lifting the lid a little bit on what would be the messy in your life so that someone else can have the courage to look at their messy. And so thank you for giving that gift to my audience today.
Well, thank you, Gina, for having me. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Today, my friends, I have been speaking with achea-redd. She's the author of Be Free, Be You. Head over to her website at realgirlsfart.com. Learn how to be fearless, authentic, a rescuer, and a trailblazer. And if you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 164, I will have links to Achea there. So if you're driving, don't worry. Just head over there and click those hyperlinks to get to her and to get a copy of her book. While you're there, please leave your name and email address. Join my tribe. I send out periodic emails. Friends, it's so important for us to recognize that it's okay not to be okay. This is part of the life that we live. It's part of the journey that we take, and you don't have to take this journey alone. Achea is a resource. Her website is a resource. Her book is a resource. If any of this resonated with you, please reach out, read those resources, give yourself some grace, practice self-compassion, be kind, give yourself room to grow, and definitely get comfortable being uncomfortable and recognize that in that discomfort, that's where the victory lies. Trust the process, my friends. We look forward to sharing more inspirational conversations with you in the future. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.